95% of your buyers aren't in market. But when you think of the splits of how marketing budgets are generally allocated, the vast majority of most marketing budgets are going to the 5% that are in market.
How would you know when you sort of reached that max 5% sort of in market TAM?
When you raise the budget and you're not seeing the incremental results from that. My entire focus right now is the 95%. If I could, rewind the clock and change something, that's what I would have done. I would have started this a lot earlier.
There's a difference between creating content that is able to get attention and then content that can drive future intent. How do those strategies look for you all today?
The one thing that's working really well right now is
Well, Sylvia, thank you for joining me for an episode today. Super excited to chat. We are working together. I've been looking into and following your all's work for a while. And for context for everybody, you are the CMO of Kandji. Kandji is an Apple device management platform and security platform. You've had incredible growth over the last, you could probably clarify, but I think it's 5-6 years or so. You've been with the company. You were employee number 4, coming in as head of marketing, and been there from basically day one, like through this entire journey, now to close to $1 billion or more valuation. And there's a lot I'm sure we could talk about for many hours. We'll obviously confine this to an hour or less in terms of like the marketing and content strategies you all have done and how those have evolved. But yeah, I'm really excited to kind of dig into how you all are thinking about. Obviously, there's two camps, in many ways these days with like marketing philosophy of like marketing to the 5% who are in market at any given time. They're going to Google, they're going to ChatGPT, they're actively searching out a solution like Kandji, and then there's others who are like representing that full TAM of like the rest of the 95% of those potential buyers who aren't necessarily looking for a solution, but maybe in 6 months when they're out of a contract with a competitor, they now can actually explore a little bit more. And the goal there is like Kandji's already top of mind for them. And so I know you all think about, all that a lot as well. And maybe to start, could you give just like maybe a high level on like that journey from how you all were thinking about marketing and content and the 5% versus the 95%, like in those early days and years compared to now, like what that evolution has looked like?
I love the way you frame that question. And I love the name of your podcast being 95%. And the way that I've been thinking about this a lot recently is 95% of your buyers aren't in market. But when you think of the splits of how marketing budgets are generally allocated, the vast majority of most marketing budgets are going to the 5% that
Yep.
are in market. And obviously, you need your budget to go to places that are going to generate a pipeline number so that you can prove yourself and get more budget and grow the company. And I understand all those dynamics, but I do think it's a major missed opportunity that I've seen here, that I've seen at many other companies where the budget is not remotely distributed in alignment with the percentage of the buyers and where they are in that stage. And so how our journey has evolved over time. So I started as employee number 4. We had absolutely nothing. We had no customers. We had no website. We had no brand. It was really starting from the ground up. And I really love that stage of a company
Mm.
and I've done this a couple times in my career. I actually did it before Kandji. I did it at a company called Flowcast. They're actually now worth 1.6 billion. They're eyeing an IPO. They're killing it. I also came in as the first marketing hire there and really built 0 to 1. So that 0 to 1 playbook is one of my passions. I think it's evolved so much over time, but that's something that I think you just have this incredible opportunity to just deeply understand your buyer and have this blank slate of how you get to build
Mhm.
the way that you speak to that buyer. So back to your question of kind of how this has shifted over time. So in the very beginning, when we first launched Kandji, we were very focused on the 5%
Mhm.
because
Yep.
you're new in market. There's going to be people out there that are just, ready, and they're
Yep.
looking for something that you're offering. And so in the early days, we had a lot of success with LinkedIn ads,
Hmm.
specifically like LinkedIn ads driving pipeline, which
Yep.
was really interesting. So LinkedIn ads, Google ads, those classic, uh, targeting the 5%, and the ads honestly that worked best were just, here's what we do.
Yeah.
And that was it. It was very cut and dry. We managed and secure Apple devices, and we would get demo requests from those. But over time, that play didn't work as well. And
Mm.
we kept scaling it, and we kept trying to optimize it and find ways to make, the Google ads and that bottom of funnel LinkedIn ad play work.
Mm.
But it just didn't scale, and it didn't keep delivering at an efficient level for us at scale and over the long term. And that's exactly because of, that intro that you said of the 5%. We were basically hounding that 5%. We maxed that out,
Mm.
and then we are now pivoting into the 95% in a much more focused way. So my entire focus right now, my entire team's focus, is the 95%,
Mhm.
and in building brand and building community and building something that's going to last
Mm.
and building something that's going to take us on this path to profitability.
Mm.
I believe this is the play that's going to get our company to the next level. But I think we spent a lot of money on the 5% over the first few years, hoping that we could optimize it and get it to this efficient place, without necessarily making that pivot to the 95% as early as honestly we should
Mm.
have. So that's where we are now.
Mm.
And so, yeah, the tricky part is it's hard to measure. It's takes time. And so my recommendation to anyone who was back there where I was in the early stages would be to start as soon as possible and do it based on conviction, do it based on a deep understanding of the buyer. And the data may not always tell you what you want to hear in terms of the ROI of those types of investments, but you have to make that investment early on, or you're going to hit a
Mm.
point where the 5% budget isn't giving you the ROI you need. And then you're going to be starting from scratch, building something that does take time. So you'll be a little bit behind the ball. So if I could, rewind the clock and change something, that's what I would have done. I would have started this a lot earlier.
This is such a good topic that is not talked about enough, which is like what timing of the sequencing of that. Because I think it does make sense, especially when you're going from 0 to 1. Like, let's go capture those that are in market right now. Like, that is, I mean, to me, that's a no brainer place for us to start, because we got to prove the model. We got to generate our first initial customers and like get that flywheel going. How would you think about that decision today in terms of like, how would you know when you sort of reached that sort of max 5% sort of in market TAM to know, okay, we got to really like, let's not go 2 years past this and then realize we should start the 95% strategy? Like, how would you look at kind of knowing when to flip that switch?
The way I would think about it is you're going to start spending some budget on that 5%. And then it's going to work.
Yep.
And then you're going to start scaling that budget, and you're going to scale it, and you're going to scale it some more. I think the biggest flag or catalyst for being like, okay, we got to start investing in the 95% would be when you raise the budget and you're not seeing the
Mhm.
incremental
Yep.
results from that.
Yep.
And that could be a budget amount. Like you
Yeah.
have only a set audience that's in that 5% bucket. They're saturated and you've maxed it out. Or it could be a time thing as well.
Yep.
The people that are going to respond to that initial trigger have already converted, and now you're targeting the same people over time with this bottom of funnel
Mm.
ask that's not building the connection relationship that's leading
Mm.
to that immediate return and pipeline that you're looking for. So I'd say,
Yep.
once you stop seeing the incremental returns as you're increasing that budget, which I think that honestly happens pretty early on,
Mm.
then I
Yeah.
think that's a flag to start making that pivot and really investing in the 95%. But I think that's the latest possible time. You should probably
Yeah.
do it earlier than you think you should.
Yeah. At least getting like some form of that motion started. Obviously, like the content ecosystem, and we can go into some of the content strategies and stuff, but like that ecosystem can grow over time, but you don't have to start with like doing everything: YouTube, newsletter, short form, LinkedIn. Like there's a lot of different things you could stack, over time. But yeah, to your point, like at least like getting started with the base foundation. So yeah, within that in mind, like how do those strategies look for you all today? In terms of like the content strategies, the 95%. Yeah, how are you all, thinking about that, or what sort of levers are you pulling that you're liking these days, and what your vision is for it?
Yeah, I can mention one thing that's working really well. And then I can talk through just our journey of
Mhm.
how we started on this 95% path. Because I
Yeah,
think we did a couple things early on that were very foundational to making sure we were on the right track.
for sure.
The one thing that's working really well right now is people on LinkedIn. So, not your corporate LinkedIn account, but
Yep.
the people at the company, almost this play of building internal influencers
Hmm.
at your company. And I think this is in large part because the LinkedIn algorithm just favors people content more than company content. You can post the same thing on the company account, a person's account. The person's account is going to do a lot better, even if that person has a much smaller following
Yep.
than the company account. So we've been building these internal influencers at our company. We support them, we help them, we record videos with them, videos specifically on people's accounts. That's
Mhm.
working really well.
Yep.
And we're measuring a lot of our early success on this journey just by impressions. We need a simple way to be like, are the early indicators there that this is working? So we're measuring that just based on impressions. I think a lot of people try to overcomplicate the measurement of brand. We'll get there eventually, but you got to start somewhere. And
Yeah.
impressions is just a nice leading indicator where you get that immediate response, it's working. So when we look at the spread of just the impressions we're getting on the brand overall, that's organic.
Hmm.
The people's accounts are what's growing and what's working the best. So that's huge.
Love
But
that.
going back to just kind of our journey, so like where we started, what we did early on as we embarked on this 95% journey, one thing we started with was we did a buyer journey research project. And
Mm.
we did this with an external agency, which, maybe not everyone will have the budget or the resources for that, but it was helpful having an external agency do that. And they essentially did a survey, they interviewed some customers, they interviewed some internal folks, and they came up with an entire buyer journey, which included what are the catalysts, the things that happen
Yep.
that become buying triggers for
Yep.
what you're selling. And so for us, an example of this would be like an audit. So if you need to be compliant with a
Mm.
certain compliance regulation, and they're different in every geo,
Yep.
but if you need to be compliant, then you have a requirement to have security and management systems in place for your devices.
Yep.
And so that's a buying trigger because it creates urgency. There's no decision for those customers.
Right.
They need it. And so whether it's you or a competitor, they're going to get something. And so that's a great example of a buying trigger. So that's something we got many of these buying triggers. So now these are all things we can create content around that will speak to people that are on the path and on the journey to needing something that we offer. And it can be an immediate trigger, it can be a longer term trigger. So that was really helpful, the buyer journey research project. The other thing we did, we have a pretty decent blog following on our blog, actually, that we have
Nice.
built over time. That's one of the things we have done for a very long time.
Yep.
And we ran a survey where we just asked them, where do you get your content? Where do you go for what events do you go to? What
Yep.
social accounts do you follow, et cetera? But we framed it in, hey, we're collecting this data and we're going to put together a report that we're going to share with you. We're going to share the results of this with you because people want to know where their peers are getting
Mm.
that information.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just, hey, we want this data because we want it, because we
Smart.
did. We wanted it to inform where we meet people.
Right.
Just knowing your community and where they hang out is really important. But we also wanted it to create some value for them. And so we got just an incredibly high engagement on that survey because people would write in the notes, "Oh, I follow this person, but I'd really be curious who other people are following." And so that worked really well. And that basically gave us a roadmap of, should we focus on YouTube? Should we focus on LinkedIn? Should we
Mm.
focus on, there's
Mm.
many channels. The ones that rose to the surface for us: LinkedIn, YouTube, Reddit.
Yep.
Those were the top three. These are IT and security folks. They're very technical.
Yep.
Those are the mediums that they prefer. For every company, it's going to be different. But that just gave us so much clarity on, okay, we would like to be everywhere, but where are we going to put our intention? And that made it just very clear what we were going to talk about. It also just what events are we going to go to? Check. Like what, influencers might we potentially partner with? Check. And so that was very foundational as well to
Mm.
just giving us a lot of conviction and a lot of clarity on the brand plays that we were making. And I think that's really the key to all of this. I think going back to the customer and understanding your
Yes.
buyer so deeply.
Yes.
And I describe it as like hearing the music. Are you close enough to them that you can hear the music?
Mm.
If you can hear the music, you're going to be able to speak
Mm.
to that buyer, and it's going to make your whole brand strategy incredibly obvious.
Mm.
And that's so helpful because, like we talked about, the measurements difficult. You're not always going to get the measurement feedback loop that you want. So that conviction needs to come from somewhere. And when you have some data behind it, between the buyer research thing and the survey, we had so much clarity and conviction around what we were building. And that helps in lieu of having perfect data.
This is so good. There's a lot we could go into on all of this. The first thing I'll mention is like, I really like how on the LinkedIn side for the organic like thought leadership play is starting with a simple metric to know if we are going the right direction and not over analyzing and trying to over scrutinize more bottom of funnel metrics from that right out the gate. A lot of people will say, well, impressions is a vanity metric. And I don't agree with that because like the whole point of this is for this content to get viewed. If yes, you can maybe gamify it and stuff like that, but you'll feel if it's working. And like if we're getting more impressions week over week, month over month, that is a sign that this content is resonating and this is working. And that's the directional sort of top of funnel sign. And then how that content then helps create the memory association with those potential buyers at those buying trigger moments. That's where that plays out over the course of the future when those buying moments occur. But if we overanalyze that stuff too quickly, then like it may lead us to the wrong conclusions. That's a sort of a common thing that a lot of people talk about is like, oh, impressions don't matter and all of that stuff. And so I like how you simplified it to that. I'd like to go into actually like the buyer journey research a little bit and the survey a little bit. So this is actually a topic that we haven't covered much yet on the show. And it's also one that a lot of teams, I feel like, maybe not necessarily because they don't want to, maybe to your point, they don't necessarily have budget to like go get some external help or what have you, but which I empathize with, but it's something that seems skipped over a lot. Like, and I understand like we want like time is of the essence, like let's just go, go, go. What I often find though is that the marketing teams and the content teams have a really good sense of their audience and like what might resonate and what content series, to move forward with. But then when there is some of this validation or invalidation from the customers and the audience themselves, even if it's just a like 10% directional change in direction from what the original assumption was, it ends up creating like 100x the outcome just because we're saying the right things and positioning it in an even more resonant way. So yeah, in terms of like if you were recommending, with like tactical advice on, another CMO or head of content, how to go about, doing that in a way that gets the best result. Like, so we know our audience even better. We know what problems they have. We know how we can connect those problems to our product in a non-salesy way through the content, like all of those things. Yeah. Any other details you could share on the survey and the buyer research?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways to do this really scrappy.
Cool.
And So I'll start with the buyer journey thing. We actually did a Scrappy version of this
Yep.
maybe 2 years ago. So
Yep.
I can share what we did there because it actually worked really well. And the one with the vendor was even more deep, and that was great.
Yeah.
But one thing we did was we have, notes in HubSpot on the first call that the reps have with somebody. And generally the reps are going to have questions or asking about, what's the pain? And they're always trying to identify like the story behind why someone's there.
Yep.
And so I would say in a lot of cases, this data probably already exists somewhere in your systems. In our case, it was this first call and it was the notes that this rep logged on that first call. You
Yep.
could maybe also get it from call record, analyzing Gong or Apollo recordings or something like that. But for us, it was that note where the rep was specifically required to write notes about the pain points and the catalysts that were leading to the conversation. And so I actually had one of our product marketers just go through 20 deals
Mhm.
and read those notes and look for patterns. And it was just 20 deals. It was not, this wasn't like a crazy data project. This was literally pulling them up one by one, taking notes and finding patterns. And that alone was enough. And so I'd say that's my recommendation. If you don't have the resources to go and do the agency thing, just ask yourself, where does this information already live? And it could be in someone on your team's head as well that you go and talk to. In our case, we had these notes. And so I think that's really helpful. And yeah, it doesn't have to be a data thing, even. It can be a little bit scrappy and a little
Yeah.
bit like we're just going to read through these notes and look for patterns. And I think that alone is really helpful.
Right.
The other thing, so for the survey, we actually did the survey really scrappy. So, but I think you get even scrappier with it. So the way we did it, we had a type form survey and we just emailed it out to our blog readership list, our emailable database, which is pretty engaged. And I do think letting them know we were going to share the results from that with them was a
Mhm.
huge key part of making the survey successful. So I would absolutely
Yep.
recommend doing that. But we just had simple type form survey and they were all open-ended questions. Who do you follow? What mediums do you prefer? I think the mediums one was like a drop down of options,
Mm.
but all of the rest were just
Yep.
open text fields because we weren't looking for something incredibly, analytical. We just wanted a list of ideas.
Yeah.
And so that I think was key because you don't want to be giving people like drop downs and options. You just want them to give you as much as they're going to give you.
Yep.
And so that was really helpful. So the way we phrased the questions was just like, what social accounts do you follow? What events do you attend? Open-ended questions. And then at the end, we took all of the raw data, which was very messy,
Mm.
and we wrote, a whole blog post on it. We included some charts where it made sense, but for the most part, it was just like, here's a big list of people you can follow, and people really appreciated that. I think an even scrappier way you could do the survey is instead of doing a survey, you can just send an email to 10 customers
Yes.
and ask them. And I
Yes.
think that's completely fine as well. 10 customers that you have good relationships with, send them those open ended questions and bullet points. I think that would have been a great start as well. So, yeah, I think there's many degrees to the scrappiness that you can pull these off. And I agree with you. The research always tends to fall to the back burner because you feel like you understand your customers pretty well. And
Yep.
so you're like, do I really need to go and ask them?
Right.
But I do think there was some new things we learned. And two, even if you have an idea in your mind of what your customer's thinking or what the buying triggers are, who they follow, something about seeing it on
Mm.
paper, so to speak, and getting that kind of like validation that
Mm.
even if it's just validation that you're on the right track, that alone is valuable. Even if it doesn't change a single thing you were going to do,
Right.
the level of conviction it gives you and clarity it gives you, and the way you can go to other team members and be like, here's why we're doing this because we
Mm.
got this information here is just validation that you're on the right track. That alone is worth doing the research.
100%. And like, I feel like this is actually getting even, it's always been very important, but it's getting even more important in like the AI content creation, like world era, which is like, if we are the closest to our customer or prospect in their heads, what they think, what they feel, who they pay attention to, what problems they have. And then we've also got our internal subject matter expertise, which is like domain expertise that's not necessarily in an LLM. Somebody competing against you who is not doing those things, and they're just kind of doing the old playbook of like trying to round up already available content into ways that can get in front of them or what have you. But like, it's not really solving the problems that's inside their head. And it's not really, it doesn't have too much like true domain expertise or proprietary data or things like that. You're now like at a serious advantage when you do those things. And to your point, it's like, I think it does sound sometimes like scary. It's like we need to go do this months long project to like understand our buyers better or whatever. But we recommend the same thing all the time, which is like, before you start your content series, like, what if you get on a call with 5 customers, just
Mhm.
5, and just ask them open-ended questions about what content they consume, what platforms it's on, who they learn from, what do they like to learn, what do they think is missing that they would like to learn more about, that's like not readily available in the market. And like the gold that comes from just those subjective, like this is not statistically valid data, like you can't like run a statistical confirmation on this across your whole like cohort, but you get these great subjective opinions on stuff that really, I think, open up um like with much more conviction, to your point, your ability to go and execute on an idea that you have. So yeah, I
Yeah.
do think like, yeah, we could get like the 80% solution of this is like, just like you said, it's like send an email to some customers, maybe get on a phone call, 3 to 5 of them. That's a 2 week at max, project really. And like you've got 80% of that like full, maybe whatever, couple months, 3 months, whatever project that's going even deeper, but you're 80% further ahead than you would be just based on your own assumption. So
I agree. And the agency that did the buyer journey research project, it was so funny. They interviewed 5 customers and then they did this giant survey. I think it was like 300 people filled it out, whatever. The results didn't change between the 5
amazing.
conversations.
Yes.
And then when they supplemented it with 300 more, it was exactly the same.
Incredible.
So I
Yeah.
think you can go a long way with a small
Yeah.
sample size. Our data team would probably yell at me if they saw our survey,
Yeah.
but it really does work. It's so effective. And I think you're talking about this difference between like AI LLMs repurposing content that's already out there versus this different type of approach that's a lot more, attached to the source, so to
Hmm.
speak. Like
Yep.
it's a little more raw and original. It's
Yep.
actually original versus just repurposing.
Yep.
I think another thing that this research allowed us to do was have strong opinions.
Mm,
And we're really shifting our brand right now. In the past, we were very educational, we were very helpful.
mm,
Now, I think it's table stakes to have an opinion
mm.
because if
Yep.
you're just putting something out there that's helpful, that's what everyone can do based on the content that's already out there with AI, and they can just put out something that's helpful.
Yep.
And I still think it's important to be helpful, but if you don't also include some kind of opinion,
Mhm.
I think your company should have opinions. I think the people, if you're building LinkedIn influencers internally, for example,
Yep.
they should bring in their own personal opinions. And the opinion is original and unique and human. And I think that's what
Mm.
stands out in the sea of AI content right now is a
Yes.
person with an opinion or even a company with an opinion.
Yes. Very much agree. How have you gone about helping to sort of formulate those for Kanji, but also maybe there's like some specific ones with some of the internal thought leaders that you have as well that are related, but maybe not exactly the same. But yeah, what's been your approach to developing those?
Yeah, we actually did something really, really cool around this. So, what we wanted to tap into was what are the opinions that our product team has when they're building product?
Mm-hmm.
And so we got our product leaders in a room and we asked them a lot of these questions, things like, what do you believe about the industry is completely wrong, that everyone thinks is a certain way, but you think it's something different?
Mm-hmm.
Or what's something you believed for a long time that changed maybe when you joined and you started building? And we really got to the heart of the product principles. Like
Mm.
when they go to build something,
Yep.
how do they build that in a way that's different? And some really clear themes emerged through that conversation that then we could take into our content. So, an example was instead of like if customer comes to us and asks, like, we need this feature. And so, okay, customer feedback, we got to build this feature. Instead of, doing, competitor research or seeing what other people have built and rebuilding it, or trying to just check a box and being like, hey, customer, I built this thing for you. I'm checking this box. They go so many layers deeper and they look at what is this person trying to achieve,
Mm,
and what is the most efficient path to that outcome.
mm,
And there's a lot of things we built that are just completely different approaches than anyone's taken because of that philosophy of, I want to get this person from A to B as efficiently as possible. I
yep.
want to abstract out all the complexity that's maybe snuck in over time because something used to be a certain way 10 years ago. And so now there's all this like legacy baggage around how people do work. And
Yep.
so if we take a fresh look and a blank slate at it, we can find an easier path to the solution. So the opinion that comes out of that is, we're anti-complexity. We abstract out the complexity. We
Mm,
try to get to the outcome as quickly as
mhm,
possible. And I think a lot of people in this industry find a lot of safety in complexity because it's a form of job security. My job is complicated, and therefore
mm,
I need to do this job. Therefore, I'm safe. But our encouragement to people and our opinion that we have is that it's those that are able to uh, get their way out of complexity that are going to rise up and sort of be the winners in this next era. I think
mm,
AI is obviously a giant example of this. I think a lot of things are being abstracted and simplified right now. And
mhm.
it's the people that learn to lean into that
Yep.
and, let go of the complexity that they maybe take some security in, and find a path to least complicated way of doing something so that they can do even more. Those are the folks that are going to rise up in their careers, that are going to make the biggest impact on their companies. So we kind of took this product principle around complexity, and we turned it into, like, what's the mindset that people need to have in this time that we're in to be able to win and be able to, advance in their careers and have a big impact.
This is great because I always believe like in order to have content that has like differentiated content that is successful, it needs to be aligned with those POVs in the narrative that the company like that is generated from the company strategy.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's skipped. Like we could create content just like for our audience because like there's a difference between creating content that is able to get attention and then content that can drive intent, future intent. And so, like, we need to be memorable at those future buying triggers. And the only way to do that is if our content is having that connection point between the company POV, problems it solves, narratives, and then what the content is saying. And that's a difficult balance to make. But to your point, I love this approach you took because you started with what is our opinions about the product, like, and the problems that the product is solving. And then we can figure out how to translate that into the content in a non-salesy, in an opinionated way that stands out and is interesting. So how have you then thought about translating that messaging into the content itself, whether that be like the content series vehicles that you're doing it in, or like how, we need to hit these topics because these are the main points we want to champion. Like, yeah, any way you thought about translating that into like the content itself.
Yeah, that's a great question because we had all these inputs, right? We had the survey, we had the
Yeah.
research project, we had this conversation with product. And so it's like, how do you take all of that great source material and turn it into a content strategy that's,
Yeah.
executing efficiently and you're able to ship that? So we do a lot of hackathons. We'll basically get in a room and we'll build something
Mhm.
as a team. And this is a format that I really love. We've done a lot of actually AI hackathons, which has been really cool because everyone gets to share that AI information with each other. But I would say that's like that's the step we went to next. So we had all these inputs, and so we would do these hackathon projects where, um, some of them were creative brainstorms. Some of them were like, okay, we've latched onto an idea and now we need to build out the workflow for this content stream. So I'd say like getting your team together in a hackathon is a really great way to like
Mhm.
accelerate that process of taking all the source material and turning it into something actionable. But one like core concept that we had that was really helpful was this idea of anchors and distribution.
Mhm.
So in our content, I call this the content flywheel. We have all these anchors that power these distribution channels for us.
Mhm.
I think this is the best way to set up your practical content strategy because
Yep.
if your content teams can feel really disjointed sometimes. It's like the social person's trying to get their stuff over here, and then the email person's doing their thing over here, and blog is doing their thing over here.
Yep.
When we incorporated this sort of anchor distribution concept, it really helps unify everything and bring it all together, and it saves you a ton of time
Mm.
because it's like your content anchors are powering this whole distribution engine. So an example of this would be like our podcast.
Okay.
So our podcast is a major anchor for our entire content flywheel. It's going to power so much of our content. And so instead of taking all these source inputs and looking at the whole content engine and being like, how do we talk about these things?
Yeah.
We can take these inputs and then we can focus on an anchor like the
Mhm.
podcast.
Yep.
And we can ask ourselves, how do we bring these themes into the podcast? Can we interview someone that has
Mhm.
experience with, an audit, for example, so we can speak to that buying trigger? Or can we interview somebody who on our podcast who has taken something really complicated and they've found a way to simplify it and they can tell the really tactical story of that journey?
Yes.
So then that podcast then becomes our newsletter, it becomes our blog posts, it becomes our social posts with the clips from that podcast. It becomes even things that sales reps can send to prospects who may not be ready to buy.
Yep.
It really powers the entire content engine.
Yep.
And I think that really simplifies it a lot because if you're trying to connect the dots between all these inputs and
Yes.
all this content you have to make, it's going to get way too complicated. But the ability to take that source material and point it at a specific anchor
Yep.
is a lot simpler. And then we would get together in a hackathon and we would build, okay, we have our podcast. How are we going to build our process in? We use Asana for project management.
Mm.
Okay, how are we going to take that podcast now and use it to power our entire
Mm.
content engine? And it's just a way to do it where you can keep your sanity and it gives you a lot more clarity on how to be
Yes.
creative with it without getting all twisted up in the different channels.
And how have you thought about the team structure within that then? Whether that be the content team or, who owns some people own social newsletter like you were talking about before. Because yeah, to your point, depending on how the org chart is structured, there may be like almost conflicting goals between different team members almost, or they're like, we're not all driving towards the same thing. Like everybody's got their own KPI. But to your point, it's like not necessarily bubbling up to like a North Star together. So this inherently, I think, helps this process, the anchor and the distribution delineation, like helps inherently just with that. But yeah, any other ways you've thought about like just the team structure to help execute on all that?
Yeah. The main thing we do is every anchor has an owner,
Okay.
and then every channel has an owner.
Yeah.
And so sometimes those things mix and match, right? The person that owns the podcast isn't going to own all the channels that
Right.
that podcast gets distributed onto.
Yep.
But I do think that helps clarify who's owning what, right?
Mhm.
If every anchor has a clear owner, so then the content anchors are getting created and then every distribution channel has an owner, so we can make sure
Yep.
that if we don't have enough content for a specific channel that someone's raising their hand and saying that,
Yeah.
or if an anchor is, we're behind on something, then someone owns that. So
Yep.
I would say at the simplest level,
Yep.
that's the way we have it set up. Every anchor, every distribution channel has an owner. And our team is I think we work very much on a project basis.
Mhm.
I have had times in the past where the roles are incredibly clear. And I would say the
Mhm.
roles right now are blurrier than ever. And
Mhm.
this is probably common on marketing teams.
Yeah.
Like job titles and what that person is doing, I think is less clear than ever
Mhm.
because we're constantly throwing new creative projects and ideas and anchors into the mix
Mhm.
and, assigning those to whoever's passionate about working on it. And so I'd say, honestly, it's pretty fluid right now. We do have, kind of groupings and owners of different areas of the marketing engine,
Mhm.
but I would say it's probably more fluid now than it's ever been.
Yeah, it's almost like approaching it from like the structure standpoint is not necessarily the roles, but it's the strategy. And then maybe who is owning what and like who's helping with what, that's a little fluid, but the strategy is the anchor, the content anchors, and then the distribution or the channel like level. And
Exactly.
and I think that's really smart because like things are evolving very quickly. The platforms are evolving very quickly, like what levers you might want to pull on each platform, what content strategies are working right now. Like all of that stuff is, we went through like 10 years or whatever of like basically doing SEO keyword optimization. And like that was pretty much one of the main content strategy. And now it's like you've got 10 different platforms you could create stuff for. And within that, each of those have their own like strategies that you could do. So I think just clarity around how your content strategy looks and then like who you fill in and what parts to own what can be a little bit more fluid. I think that's very smart.
Yeah, it's been really helpful. And yeah, it's funny you mentioned SEO because this question keeps popping up recently. People keep asking me, AI SEO, how do we do this? How do we optimize for the LLMs?
Oh
And
yeah.
I have yet to talk to someone who has a very deep answer on this.
Hmm.
The best answer I've heard so far is from Dave Kellogg. I don't know if anyone follows the Kell blog. Um, he does these predictions every year. One of his predictions was around this focus on AI, basically AI SEO. I don't know what to call it exactly,
Hmm.
but it's like how to optimize so that you show up well if someone's like searching for your company on ChatGPT.
Yeah.
And his hypothesis was the LLMs value reputable sites
Yep.
and they view reputable as like something that's like raw community. So like reviews, Reddit, they value those things because they're authentic.
Mhm.
They also value reputable sites, which news sites are, some of the highest domain authority, the most reputable. And so PR is almost kind of having a comeback, I
Mhm.
think, because PR is sort of the play to get that
Yep.
content on those more reputable sites, which are valued by the LLMs. So that's the best answer I've heard so far. But I'm asking everyone else the same question because I need to dig further into it. But I think everyone's wondering, do we keep investing the same in Google Ads, for example, as we've done in the past,
Mhm.
or do we pivot more to, optimizing for the LLMs? Why I share all of this is because I think this whole concept of investing in the 95%, building your brand, building community, that's all going to help with that.
Yeah.
And so regardless of, the specific strategies of how to optimize for the
Yep.
LLMs to say nice things about you, the bottom line is like the 95% play is going to help
Mm.
with that because it's going to mean more people saying good things about you and you're going to have more content out there. So, yeah, that's been an interesting one that's been popping up recently for me.
Yeah, for sure. And the good thing too is like if somebody didn't have to go to the LLM or Google or a review site to find out about you when they're in that moment of like I need to buy something in this category, but they actually already knew about you. You were already tucked away on this list, of like one of the three vendors in that category they already knew. Then they also go to the LLM and they also go to Google and they like round up some other names.
Yep.
You are at an advantage immediately already because like you're a known entity to them, in some
Mhm.
way, shape, or form. Like inherently in the fact that they already know you, there's some level of trust already there. And so you have a leg up against somebody just like them showing up on a demo cold to somebody that, found out about them. So it's like, yeah, even the 5% strategies with like the LLMs mentioning you and stuff, those are changing. And then same thing with 95%. So I
Right.
think like, I know it can sometimes be a little scary right now with like, all the AI changes that are happening for marketers and stuff like that. But like, I try to look at it positively. Like, we have more tools available to us than ever before in terms of where we can reach our audience. There are more people to sell to than ever before. Like, I kind of feel like it's the best time ever in history to be a marketer, and we just like can reframe our thinking around that. And I know there's all these fear mongering posts, going out on like LinkedIn every week, but like
Something's dead. Something new
yeah,
is dead
everything's
every
dead.
week.
Everything's dead. Um, so no, I think it's an exciting time. But when it
Yeah.
comes to like that flywheel for you of the content anchors and then the distribution points, how do you mentioned impressions earlier for LinkedIn. What other ways are you thinking about the measurement of like this 95% side? Because this is a big reason why companies don't
Yeah.
move too quickly into it and too heavy into it. So yeah, I'm curious how you think about it.
The best, I think, next step for us is going to be sales call recordings.
Nice.
I
Yep.
think this is like the next level. So
Yep.
I think impressions is number one.
Yep.
Are we getting engagement? Are people looking at things? Are they consuming it? What's working? What's not working? That's a
Mhm.
great feedback loop for the content part.
Yep.
I think the next measurement level for us is going to be setting up some more sophisticated tracking within our call recording tools
Yep.
to find out, are people mentioning this on calls?
Yeah.
And it's I think that's one of the best ways to find out if things are working, because if the name of the podcast starts popping up
Mhm.
on calls, then that's another indicator that it's working, people are listening to it. The next thing I think we'll do is implement some form on the website,
Mm.
like a how did you hear about
Yeah.
us. And, every e-commerce site ever does this, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's some ways to do that right and ways to do it wrong. I think you have to pick a limited number of drop downs. You can't have like
Yeah.
27 options on there. You have to make sure they're auto rotating so that people aren't just picking the top one, whatever.
Mm.
Make it optional, make it
Mm.
after they've submitted the form
Mm.
already. So it's not, another step in the filling out the form process. But I think an optional nudge after someone fills out a form that says, how did you hear about us? Has some very limited options on there with the write in field, because you'll get some interesting stuff in the write in fields. And I think making it optional will get you better data, because then people will only fill it out if they actually want to give you that information.
Mm.
And so those are the next steps for us working further down the funnel.
Yeah.
And so, again, it's not going to be you super analytical probably,
Mhm.
but you'll at least get some very clear patterns about what's coming up in conversation.
Yep.
And so that I think is going to be the next step for us. I'm a big believer in the concept of like create the problem,
Mm.
where we could solve that now. We could put up that form now. We could have done it on day one when we started really investing in content. But I'd rather create the problem. Let's start with
Mm.
impressions, start at the top of the funnel, get that
Mm.
flywheel going. Once that's going, then we can move to the next step in the funnel and get that measurement better. Then we can move to the next step and get that better. So I think it helps to it's solve one problem at the time and create the next problem. You don't need to start collecting that data when your content's not that visible. Like, you need to start collecting it later on once that flywheel is going. So I'm trying to solve one problem at a time, basically, but we'll get there.
So good. Yeah. Looking at measuring this 30, 60, even 90 days on the bottom of funnel side after starting the strategy is, and then evaluating that on if we should keep doing it or not on the sales call recording side and on the self-reported attribution side, that is very likely going to lead to the wrong conclusion. To your point, the impression side, the engagement side, that's what to look for in those windows. And then, yeah, I like that being like a phase 2 and just knowing that going in. Yeah. And the same thing with like that stuff showing up in self-reported and on the sales calls. It's also like, I think almost like looking at any of those distribution channel sort of indicators, like if they mention newsletter, LinkedIn, podcast, YouTube, it's almost like that entire ecosystem together, like those things all help each other. So if they're mentioning any of those, it's like this strategy is working.
Yeah.
And obviously the podcast is like the anchor of it all. And
Hmm.
so maybe they don't think of it as a podcast, but they saw the clip on LinkedIn and that came from the podcast. So if they say
Yeah.
LinkedIn, a big part of that was the podcast clip driving that, for LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So yeah, it all kind of works together.
Yeah. I think that's what's so great about this. The anchor content flywheel strategy is that the anchor itself doesn't necessarily have to have a huge
Right.
following. The podcast itself doesn't have to have a huge following.
Right.
But if it's powering all of these other things, these clips for social that are getting tons of
Yes.
engagement and impressions, then it's working. And
Yes.
it's not necessarily about the anchor piece itself getting that following. It's about the flywheel that it powers.
Yes. And it's very important to decide on that, in my opinion, in the beginning. Do we want to create a number one podcast on Apple Podcasts? Or
Yep.
do we want this to be the anchor source material that we care about? We care about the Apple Podcasts and Spotify podcasts, but the source material to power our entire content engine and the success of that to be seen as a thought leader and expert and number one player in our space. Those are two different goals.
Yep.
But I think sometimes like that decision's not made. And so it's a little blurry on like what the success looks like for it.
I agree. I mean, I think the world is littered with podcasts that companies started that did 20 episodes and then they gave up,
Yeah.
probably because people weren't following the
The
podcast,
downloads. Yeah.
but they probably missed the second part of the flywheel
Yes.
that powered everything else.
Exactly.
And then they were, just weren't clear on the intention of it.
Exactly.
And yeah, for us, very clearly, our intention is powering social, powering our blog newsletter. And if the podcast gets a following, cool. But that's not a metric that's going to be on my like top dashboard.
This is great. We could talk for a very long time. I know we're pretty much at time. Last quick question, if you have any thoughts, like just the future in general, content in B2B. Outside of anything we've talked about, we've obviously talked about a lot of those things, but anything else like super interesting to you, trends like you're excited about studying right now?
Yeah, we talked about LinkedIn influencers already, but one thing that really comes to mind is I think marketing teams are really evolving a lot.
Hmm.
One of the things that I'm really interested in and passionate about is this idea of full stack marketers.
Yes.
I feel like this world of, you know, I work on this one area and then I hand this thing over to this other team and then I hand it to this other team and then
Yep.
it kind of works through this like conveyor belt of people to get to completion. I think that age is kind of over because a lot of these AI tools are making skill sets accessible to marketers that weren't before.
Yep.
And that could be something as simple as copywriting. It could be design. It could be, and even things like animation,
Mhm.
video, et cetera. I think marketers are going to have more of those skills at their fingertips. And so you're not necessarily going to need all those different teams and people to do one thing. I
Yep.
think marketers will be able to have more ownership over a specific area because they can do all of the inputs that create that output on their own with the help of some of these AI tools. So I think, like I mentioned, the roles are getting blurrier. I think they're going to keep getting blurrier. And folks are going to be more focused probably on owning maybe it's specific, channels or
Mhm.
audiences. I think the way that we segment marketing teams is going to
Mhm.
change because a lot it's going to be less based on skills and more based on a focus area or a passion. And I think
Yep.
that's actually great because I think it's going to allow us to move a lot faster. And then someone's going to be able to look at something they've created and be like, I built that versus being one piece of the puzzle
Mm.
of, shipping that thing. And so I think it's actually a really great shift. But I do think it's going to require people to learn a lot of new skills that maybe they thought that they couldn't, but those skills are going to be a lot more accessible.
Such a good message, and yeah, definitely agree that we've got a positive spirit here about the future. I like that for marketers
Absolutely.
and content teams. Sylvia, this was awesome. Thank you for the time. I'd recommend obviously anybody looking into Apple device management to go to Kandji.com. And I'm assuming like if anybody kind of wants to follow along, you're creating a lot of content yourself. I believe mostly on LinkedIn. So follow you on LinkedIn and connect with you there. But anywhere else you direct people?
LinkedIn, absolutely. And I need to post more, to be honest. I really want to share this journey that we're on because I talk to so many other CMOs about it, and
Yeah.
it's what everyone is talking about. So, but I do share quite a bit on LinkedIn. That's definitely the place to connect. And yeah, just excited for this journey to continue. And I just feel fired up about it. I feel like I'm working on something that I'm really passionate about, and I'm working on something that's the future
Mm,
of where the marketing industry is going. And so I'm just really genuinely excited about it. And I can't wait to just kind of keep seeing how this unfolds.
same. And everybody who wants to follow along, go follow Sylvia on LinkedIn. And yeah, thank you again. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Eric.